Before 3000 BCE until about 1100 BCE, there were three European cultures that flourished at the same time in the Aegean region on a small cluster of islands called the Cyclades Islands. Also other islands in the Aegean Sea, Crete, the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, and on the mainland. So this whole area we call these people the Aegeans. The Aegean people were mainly farmers and herders, but of course, looking at the location, they were also seafarers. They were master traders, and they traded with Egypt and the Near East. Around 3000 to 1000 BCE, the Aegeans experienced their Bronze Age. Bronze was a prize export from this area. Now we have kind of rough dates here. We actually have trouble kind of dating some of our finds. So that's 3000 to 1000 BC is a loose date. There were three Bronze Age cultures that flourished in this region from 3000 to 1100 BCE. The Cycladic culture, the Minoan culture on Crete and Thera, and the Mycenaean culture on mainland Greece. The first of these cultures that we're going to look at is the Cycladic culture from the Cyclades Islands. In the late Neolithic, early Bronze Age, people in this area were practicing agriculture, herding, and some crafts and trades. We're not sure where these people came from, but they were here. They didn't leave any written records. So art is a major source for information about this culture. We do know that they used local stones to build and fortify their towns, and they built hillside burial chambers. From about 6000 BCE, people in this area were using poor quality clay to make different objects, utilitarian and perhaps ritual objects. By 3000 BCE, they were still making clay objects, but now they made figures of humans and animals, also domestic and ceremonial wares. Among these objects were unidentifiable objects made of terracotta, usually this orange-brown low-fired clay, and things that were incised or painted before firing with stylized designs. We're looking at an example of one of those artworks right now, the incised panel, also known as the frying pan. It is a very unusual shape. You can see that it actually kind of looks like a frying pan, and that's how it got its name. It looks like it's like this part is a frying pan and the handle is kind of like cut off. And that's how it got its name. Archaeologists saw it and they said, hey, it looks like a frying pan. So that's why it got its nickname, the frying pan. It was produced on the island of Syros. It is about 11 inches in diameter. It's produced between 2500 and 2000 BCE. What we have here is some terracotta that has been incised with specific designs. So around the border here we have these tiny little triangles. And then we have these lines that separate the triangles from this inner design. In the inner design, we have a scene, a water scene, a scene from the ocean. And we have this boat. I know it doesn't kind of look like a boat to us, but it is a boat. And these little lines right here are oars. And I'll show you some examples of similar boats in other artworks in just a second. All these spirals are meant to represent water or waves. And then over here we have a fish. This image is obviously associated with the ocean because we have this boat, and here are some illustrations of what the boat would look like. So this one is a modern artistry production of what one of the boats that they would have used would have looked like. And this one is actually produced by the Mycenaeans. So it is a culture that's kind of related to the culture that we're talking about here. It's one of those Aegean Bronze Age cultures that I mentioned in the beginning of this lecture. So you can see how we have the boat here, and then we have these oars sticking out. And we have the same thing going on here. Here's the boat. Here's this like long part right here, and then we have the oars sticking out. And then this one that actually looks interestingly similar because here we have this like random kind of fish like over here, and then this one is also surrounded by kind of random fish that actually look a lot like dolphins. So that's the kind of boats that they probably would have used. We also think that this was associated with female fertility. Obviously, it has this connection to the ocean. How does it possibly look like that it has a connection to female fertility? How do we get that? Well, remember our trusty old depiction of female genitalia during the prehistoric period is this triangle with the slit in it. And here it is on the actual artwork, but I think you can see it better in this artist reproduction. And this is just flipped. I don't know why, but it's just flipped. So you can see that depiction of female genitalia. So we think that this could represent a connection between this culture and the sea and a female fertility goddess of the sea. So they probably worship some sort of sea goddess. So that's maybe what this this particular object is showing us. So it might express hopes for a fertile sea, because of course they rely on the ocean for food, or we're not really sure. We actually have no idea what the function is. Similar objects to this one, I believe this one was actually found out of context, but similar ones were found in grave sites and same things like that. So perhaps it was produced for burial. We don't really have a lot of information. We really have no information about this. About the same time, around 3000 BCE, the Cycladian people start to make sculptures in white marble. They used obsidian scrapers to chisel and carve out this marble. Marble is actually really abundant on the island, so it wasn't like it was hard to find. They created nude figures. These figures range from a few inches to they could be 5 feet tall. They were usually recovered in graves. They seem to represent nude figures. These that we have depicted here are supposed to, or we think, represent the squatting female figure. They may represent a fertility deity. We're just not really sure. Very few males have been found. Mostly when males are found, they're usually doing something active, like maybe musicians or acrobats. But more likely, women are found in more abundance. So early figures like this one are simple. They're barely shaped into like this kind of violin-like shape. We know that, or we think that they are female, basically based on these triangle depiction of the genitalia. So kind of hard to see in these images because they are badly damaged, and they are actually rather abstracted. But there is really very little suggestion on whether they're male or female except for that triangle right there. Then about 2500 BCE, figures start to become more refined, like these. These are female figures from the Cycladic Islands from about 2500 to 2000 BCE. They're still very simple, but they're elegant, and they use lines to represent body parts. So again, we have that depiction of female genitalia, the triangle with the slit in it. Then we have their arms indicated by these lines kind of incised into the marble. They have their heads tilted back and their arms are folded and their toes point down. So you can see in this image we have the toes pointing down. You can actually see the lines that represent their toes. And you can kind of see here how their heads are sort of tilted back. I brought in these images so you can see that this one right here, they're actually meant to lay on their back. We always see them in museums represented like this, but this is actually how they were meant to be displayed. They would have probably been found in graves and things like that, but I think most of them have actually been found in graves. You can also see here a little bit, maybe some of the paint that remains. So originally they would have been painted. Now some people suggest that maybe they dressed them in textiles. I don't think so. I think they actually probably just painted them. It seems more appropriate for these forms. You know, you have your arms folded in so tightly, it seems kind of weird if you would actually dress them, because then you wouldn't be able to see the arms. So I think they were painted with clothes on, or maybe just body paint. Like this one looks like they might have either facial paint or facial decoration or tattoos on it. They also might have had hair ornaments attached to them, maybe headdresses, or maybe like hair pieces. And here's just another example. This one is actually incised with some hair detail there. And this one's actually kind of large. This one is actually a male. And we can see right here, we can see the representation of male genitalia. This one is found in the Met, which is the museum up in New York. And here's just some of the bigger ones I wanted to show you that they actually can be quite large. Most of them are kind of handheld. You'll actually see some if you get to go to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and those are handheld, but you can actually get some larger ones like these. Now I say that most of them depict females. Of course we saw this one. We are seeing a male, but that is actually rather rare. So usually we do see these female figures like we saw through here. But they also this culture also makes figures of males, and usually they're doing some sort of active activity. So this is the male lyre player from 2700 to 2500 BCE. He is made of marble. I actually have two different versions here. This one is the one that's in your book, and this one can be found at the Met, just so you can kind of get some examples. They also have their heads tilted back. It is sculpture in the round. Their bodies are very simplified. The figure is reduced to their geometric essentials. Unlike the female figures, their arms are stretched out and they are plucking the strings of the lyre. And the lyre is an instrument kind of like a harp, and it's stabilized in the man's lap. And his head is tilted back as if he's singing. It's a very expressive pose. We're not sure why these women's heads are kind of tilted back, but it does seem like the men's are in song. Maybe the women's are too, we just don't really know. Some of these type of figures are found in and around graves, but others have no archaeological context. Remember, they're very old, so sometimes maybe your great-great-great-great-grandmother found one and then it gets passed down to generations and eventually it makes its way to a museum or an art collector or something like that. We do not know the specific use and meaning of these objects. We think they were probably used in domestic worship or buried with their owners. Some of them are actually broken. Like you can see these, their legs and feet are missing. Bottom half of their legs and feet are missing. So perhaps they were symbolically broken. Perhaps as part of a funeral ritual, they would break these objects so that they wouldn't be powerful anymore. That's actually a pretty common phenomenon in early cultures. They are probably connected to funerary practices, and we think they're connected to funerary practices in the Near East because, remember, we saw the bull lyre, and we also see this guy playing a lyre. So the lyre actually plays an important role in funerary rituals during this time. The larger figures, like we saw here and here, might be used for communal worship, or they could just be a larger image because a more elite person commissioned it. We're not really sure. They could represent supernatural or votive figures. Again, we don't really have a lot of information about these, especially since they are usually found out of context.